Constance Whitfield tapped her manicured nail against the label of my father's Cabernet like she was scoring it out of 10. "You'll sign over export rights to Julian's cousin's firm by Friday," she said, smiling the way people smile when they've already decided they've won. "It's simpler for everyone." I set my wine glass down without a sound and thanked her for the suggestion. I didn't tell her I'd already found the shipping manifests that didn't match a single bottle we'd ever bottled. "My name is Rosalind Farrar, I'm 38, and until that dinner in February I ran export operations for Farrar Vineyard Estate, the label my father, Augustin Farrar, built from 40 acres of leased hillside in 1988 into one of the most respected mid-size wineries shipping out of the valley. He gave me controlling authority over the export division the year I turned 31, trusting my palate and my ledgers equally. I married Julian Whitfield 8 years ago, and from our engagement onward, his mother Constance treated my father's winery the way some people treat a family orchard nobody's harvesting properly, a resource simply waiting for the right relative to manage it correctly. "Julian has such an instinct for international markets," she'd say. "It seems wasteful to keep him just doing tastings." Over 6 years, one relation at a time, the Whitfield family found their way into positions that mattered. Julian's cousin Barnaby became our lead customs broker. Constance's nephew Felix took over distributor relations in Europe. A woman named Odile, who I later learned was Constance's goddaughter, was brought in to manage export documentation. My father approved every hire because I recommended them, and I recommended them because Julian brought me their resumes over dinner, framed as favors to family. I never stopped to ask why so many of their prior employers shared an address in a town none of us had ever visited. It began as a discrepancy in a shipping log. A container listed as 40 cases of our reserve Cabernet, bound for a distributor in Rotterdam, actually cleared customs at 62 cases, according to the bill of lading Barnaby filed. When I asked him about it, he said the extra cases were samples for a new account Julian had personally cultivated. I let it go. 2 months later, I noticed 4 separate export invoices routed through a broker entity called Meridian Sellers Trading, a company I'd never once heard mentioned in 6 years of quarterly reviews. Why did Odile already have a Meridian letterhead template saved on the shared drive before I'd even asked what the company did? I didn't confront anyone yet. I opened a private spreadsheet on my personal laptop and started logging container numbers, dates, discrepancies. When I raised the pattern with Julian over dinner, gently, framing it as a bookkeeping curiosity, he laughed and told me I was treating our marriage like an audit. When I raised it again a month later, he turned cold, said I sounded ungrateful for everything his family had done to open new markets for us. I stopped mentioning it out loud entirely. Instead, I hired an independent trade compliance investigator named Priya Osei, paid her from an account Julian didn't know existed, and met her twice a month at a cafe 2 towns over. What she found took 11 months to fully untangle. Meridian Sellers Trading wasn't a distributor at all. It was a shell entity registered to an address that traced directly back to Constance's second property in Sonoma. For 6 years, Barnaby and Felix had been quietly over-reporting shipment volumes to distributors, invoicing our winery for phantom sample allotments and market development fees that Odile approved without a second signature, while the actual surplus wine was diverted and resold through unofficial channels in Belgium and the Netherlands. Combined, the scheme had siphoned nearly $3.5 million in product and fees out of the estate over 6 years. I didn't confront Julian with the numbers. I filed for divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences, and I let Priya's report sit sealed with my attorney until the decree was final. Some people would call that cowardice. I call it patience. The moment I no longer had a husband whose family could claim any protected stake in my father's winery, I could act without a single thread of guilt slowing me down. Standing in the parking lot outside the courthouse with the decree in my bag, I called my father. I told him everything: the shell broker, the phantom sample fees, the diverted shipments moving through Rotterdam under our own label without our knowledge. I told him it was time to remove every Whitfield relative from the export division, effective immediately, security escorting each one out before the end of the day. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me the report." Within the hour, our general counsel had a name list. Within 3 hours, the terminations began. That evening, while I was still unpacking boxes in the small rental cottage I'd moved into during the separation, Constance showed up at my door. She had never once raised her voice in 8 years of holiday dinners, but she was pounding hard enough that my neighbor's porch light flicked on. When I opened it, she was already shouting, demanding I reverse the terminations, warning me I had no idea what I'd just done to a family who'd built half of what my father called his winery. I told her the only thing that had been built was a diversion pipeline, slowly, deliberately, for 6 years, and that the compliance report sitting with my lawyer proved every case of it. Something shifted in her face then, just slightly, and I knew she understood I wasn't bluffing. She tried softness next, telling me Julian still loved me, that all of this could be quietly undone if I reinstated everyone and let the past stay buried. I told her there was no version of that available to her anymore, that if she or Barnaby or Felix or Odile wanted to contest their terminations, they were welcome to do it in front of the Customs Authority, where the compliance investigation would become a matter of public record. She stopped threatening lawsuits after that. I closed the door. The following months were harder than I expected, not because I doubted the decision, but because rebuilding trust with our European distributors meant re-verifying every shipment record by hand. My father brought in a meticulous logistics auditor named Thaddeus Cray to help vet new hires and rebuild our customs relationships from licensed, verifiable brokers. Within 2 months, our actual shipment volumes finally matched our production numbers for the first time in years, and our insurers, once notified, dropped our cargo liability premium by nearly a fifth once the shell entities were severed from our records. Julian called exactly once, 3 weeks after the confrontation with his mother. He didn't defend Constance. He didn't defend the 3 relatives who'd lost their positions. He just asked how I was doing, and for a moment, the version of him I'd married showed through the version his family had spent years constructing over him. I told him I was doing better than I had in a long time, and I meant it. He didn't call again. The Customs Authority opened a formal inquiry into Meridian Sellers Trading once Priya's report was submitted as part of an unrelated import review that had already caught a regulator's attention. Barnaby and Felix relocated out of state within 2 months. Meridian was dissolved before the fiscal year closed, presumably to bury the paper trail before anyone looked too closely at its filings. My father chose not to pursue further criminal referral beyond what the inquiry required, telling me that watching them lose a business built on stolen cases was consequence enough, and that dragging our label through headlines wouldn't return a single bottle to the distributors who trusted it. 6 months later, Farrar Vineyard Estate posted its strongest export quarter in company history, every shipment verified by people who had earned their positions on competence rather than bloodline. My father named me president that spring, standing among the same rows of vines he'd planted 3 decades earlier, telling the staff gathered that the label had finally been returned to the people who actually protected what left the estate in its name. I think sometimes about that letterhead template sitting ready on the shared drive before anyone asked. Proof the truth had been waiting there the whole time for someone patient enough to open the right folder. If you'd found it first, would you have confronted them across that dinner table right then? Or would you have waited, the way I did, until the proof was too complete for anyone to talk their way around?